next Director of National Intelligence, which she will address those in her testimony today. But most important to me, as a former Director of National Intelligence, is her committee, and her commitment to bringing non-politicized truth to power and restoring trust and confidence in the intelligence community and the American public. Mr. Chairman, thank you for the opportunity to provide an introduction to this exceptional choice for next Director, if confirmed, of National Intelligence.
Thank you very much for that. Ms. Haines, let's begin by, if I could swear you in as a witness, if you'd please stand and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear to give this committee the truth, the full truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I do. Thank you. Please be seated. I'm sorry. And before we move to your statement, I want to ask you the 5 standard questions that the committee poses to each nominee who appears before us. And they require simple yes or no answers for the record if you so choose. Number 1, do you agree to appear before the committee here or in other venues when invited?
I do.
If confirmed, do you agree to send officials from your office to appear before the committee and designated staff when invited?
Yes.
Do you agree to provide documents or any other materials requested by the committee in order for it to carry out its oversight and its legislative responsibilities?
Yes, I do.
Will you ensure that your office and your staff provide such material to the committee when requested?
Yes.
And finally, do you agree to inform and fully brief to the fullest extent possible all members of this committee of the intelligence activities and covert actions rather than just only the chairman and the vice chairman?
Yes.
Thank you very much. We'll now proceed to your opening statement, and then after that, I'll recognize members by seniority for up to 5 minutes each, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Chairman Rubio, Vice Chairman Warner, members of the committee, it's an honor to be here before you today as the President-elect's nominee to be the Director of National Intelligence. And I particularly appreciate your holding this hearing today in light of the searing events of the last 2 weeks. The fact that you have not allowed these events to interrupt the work of the committee on behalf of the American people, and that you continue to operate on a bipartisan basis, something this committee I know is known for, is a testament to all of you and an example that I profoundly admire. I am also very grateful to Senator Coates for his kind introduction, for his extraordinary service, and for his wise counsel during this period, and for standing with me in support of an institution and a community that we both love. And finally, I want to say how eternally grateful I am to my husband, David, who's with me today, for his love, his support, his wisdom, his patience, and perhaps most of all, his sense of humor for the last 29 years that we've been together. If I have the honor of being confirmed, I look forward to leading the intelligence community on behalf of the American people, to safeguarding their interests, advancing their security and their prosperity, and to defending our democracy, our freedom, and our values. This role comes with clear responsibilities: advising the President and his senior advisors to inform their consideration of critical national security issues, synchronizing and prioritizing collection, analysis, and counterintelligence efforts across the intelligence community, ensuring that our intelligence work is effectively integrated and focused on the threats of today and tomorrow, responsibly stewarding and allocating our resources, promoting strong national security relationships with both our allies abroad and with our partners here at home, and engaging directly and regularly with the Senate and House Intelligence Committees on each of these priorities. All of these responsibilities are essential to a strong and effective national intelligence program. But perhaps the greatest challenge to be faced by the next DNI, internally and externally, including with the workforce, this committee, and the public, is building the trust and confidence necessary to protect the American people. To be effective, the DNI must never shy away from speaking truth to power, even especially when doing so may be inconvenient or difficult. To safeguard the integrity of our intelligence community, the DNI must insist that when it comes to intelligence, there is simply no place for politics ever. The D&I must prioritize transparency, accountability, analytic rigor, facilitating oversight and diverse thinking, not as afterthoughts, but as strategic imperatives that bolster our work and our institutions. And to be trusted, the D&I must uphold our democratic values and ensure that the work of the intelligence community, mostly done in secret, is ethical, is wise, is lawful, and effective. And I commit to you, if confirmed, that I will live in accordance with these principles and the ethos they represent, with the aim of restoring trust and confidence both within the intelligence community and among those we serve and protect. I will also seek to support and elevate the workforce and the mission. The intelligence community is made up of people with unparalleled dedication and expertise, public servants who are mission-focused and who play an indispensable role in protecting the country from the most dangerous threats without fanfare or fame, but simply through diligence. I've had the great honor to work with them before, to see their extraordinary skill and bravery up close and their patriotism, and it would be the honor of a lifetime to lead them. My intention would be to sustain and build on the tremendous work of intelligence professionals by recruiting and retaining diverse talent, promoting innovation in every aspect of our work, and fostering a culture that is ethical, nonpartisan, accountable, and aligned with the values we share as a country. The D&I must also, in my view, set a strategic vision for the work of the intelligence community that looks beyond the immediate horizon to ensure we are well postured to address developing threats and take advantage of new opportunities as they arise, promoting national resilience, innovation, competitiveness, and shared prosperity. And this means ensuring that the intelligence community has the capacity to understand, warn, protect, and defend the United States against the threats we face. This includes threats from traditional state actors, as well as evolving and critical transnational threats, including climate change, cyber attacks, terrorism, global organized crime and corruption, disinformation campaigns, and more. Our capabilities must be aligned, strategically prioritized, and integrated to be effective. For instance, we should provide the necessary intelligence to support long-term bipartisan efforts to outcompete China, gaining and sharing insight into China's intentions and capabilities, while also supporting more immediate efforts to counter Beijing's unfair, illegal, aggressive, and coercive actions, as well as its human rights violations whenever we can. And at the same time, the D&I should see to it that the intelligence community's unique capabilities are brought to bear on the global COVID-19 crisis around the world, while also addressing the long-term challenge of future biological crises, enabling U.S. global health leadership and positioning us to defend and detect future outbreaks before they become pandemics. And here at home, we must strengthen our cybersecurity, safeguard our critical infrastructure, and turn the ongoing technological revolution from a threat to an advantage by integrating new technologies to improve the capacity and superiority of our intelligence into the future. And of course, none of these aims can be achieved without a foundation of trust, which requires accountability, including through support of the Inspector General function, the protection of whistleblowers, and transparency. I believe deeply that the American people should know as much as possible about what their intelligence agencies are doing to protect them, consistent with the need to safeguard sensitive sources and methods. And if I am confirmed, I will strive to achieve that. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Vice Chairman, members of the committee, if afforded the opportunity to serve as the Director of National Intelligence, I vow to be a true partner to you, to respect your critical oversight role, and to cultivate a relationship of trust. It is a promise that I extend not only to this committee and your colleagues, but also to the American public, to the American people, every one of whom deserves a government worthy of their trust. And I look forward to earning that trust and to answering your questions today. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me just begin with something that's important to address at the outset. From the Public Financial Disclosure Report, obviously you served as a principal or a consultant at the West Exec Advisors. And did you ever consult on behalf of any foreign entities?
No, not through West Exec. I was on the advisory board of a French private company, but not of any foreign governments.
To the best of your knowledge, have you ever consulted for any company that's done business in Xinjiang or has taken a position against the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act or the Hong Kong Autonomy Act?
No, I have not, Senator.
Have you consulted for any company on the Department of Defense's list of Chinese Communist military companies?
No, Senator.
And have you ever consulted for a company on the Department of Commerce's entity list for export controls?
No, Senator.
Oh, thank you. You touched on this first, but let me just ask this because it's important, I think, for our members to get back to the regular course of business. Can we get a commitment from you to testify annually at this committee's Worldwide Threats hearing?
Yes, Chairman.
Thank you. And if this committee requests your assistance in declassifying for public release any future reports or studies that we do, can we also get a commitment from you to aid in the expeditious production of declassified committee products?
Yes, Chairman, I absolutely commit to working with you to declassify information, obviously mindful of sensitive sources and methods that we need to protect, but otherwise working with you to try to...
Where it comes into play is when we do a report and then we ask for a declassification review so we know which parts have to be compartmented, classified, or public.
I see.
And obviously the faster that process moves, the quicker the decision on what to leave classified is obviously up to the intelligence community, but our ability to produce those products are dependent on those decisions. You know, there's so much going on, but one of the areas we've talked about in our conversation is the Chinese Communist Party. And as we've seen, it's a multifaceted challenge without, I think, precedent, given it touches virtually every aspect of American life, commerce, trade, academia, immigration, obviously military, finance sector and the like. But one of the areas that's of concern is their longstanding and increasingly developing and robust influence operations to target American political figures for cultivation from the local level all the way up. They're very patient in that effort. They'll view someone who might be a mayor or even a council member that one day might be a member of a committee. But in essence, what they're trying to do is create a stable of American policymakers and influencers who share or will promote China's narrative of events around the world. As you think about, and some of these touch into areas, frankly, that are, because they're domestic, are not entirely with the intelligence community purview, and in other cases, and the vice chairman, Senator Burr, myself, and others participated in a series of roadshow type events with different sectors of our country to sort of create a level of awareness about this that I think in many cases was lacking. I think that was quite productive. Have you thought about, or what do you view in light of that, in light of those influence efforts, have you given thought to what the intelligence community's role can be in providing counterintelligence support, such as awareness training to state and local governments and other sectors of our country, so that people sort of understand that when you're being approached by someone who does business in China or is here under the guise of academia or the like, they're not James Bond. These are not, you know, but they operate in a way that is trying to influence you towards narratives that are favorable to China that ultimately will influence public policy. So have you given some thought to what the intelligence community's role would be in countering and confronting that sort of threat?
Thank you so much. Obviously, the counterintelligence challenge with China is a very important one, a priority, and something that I will need to focus on. And I haven't had a chance to get the kind of in-depth classified briefing that I'd like to on these issues to provide you with a more considered opinion. But I absolutely agree with your overall view that we need to do more training in this space. And I noted, obviously, in the work that the committee has done on Russia that one of your recommendations relates to more training in respect of counterintelligence. I think that makes sense in the context of China as well, and something that we should focus on. And I know that prior directors of national intelligence have emphasized the importance of having those partnerships with local and state actors. And I think that's a space where I would like to further engage with you on this issue, but I think having a plan for how we can increase training and education of various leaders in state and local authorities, so that they understand the threat that is facing them would be perfectly sensible.
And somewhat in line with that, but on a broader is if you look at recent events in this country, we know that one of the goals of our adversaries is to sow division, dissent within the country, to soak pre-existing challenges in our country, and because they've obviously it's very difficult for a house divided to stand, and they understand this, and obviously that poses a real challenge. And I'm making no claims here about recent events other than to say that common sense would tell you that these are times that lend themselves perfectly to foreign adversary efforts to stoke fires and drive divisions and or to take advantage. But it's difficult because often those efforts become domestic efforts and therefore begin to touch on Americans, U.S. citizens, at which point sort of the lines of the intelligence community become more blurred, domestic versus foreign target. Have you also given some thought to this challenge that we now face, where I don't think any of us expect that these efforts to continue to get us to fight with each other, not that we don't do a pretty good job of it on our own, but none of us expects that these efforts to get us to fight against each other beyond the normal is not going to continue for the foreseeable future, and what the IC's role would be in that.
Yeah, thank you, Senator. I mean, obviously, I absolutely agree with you in terms of the concern about efforts from foreign adversaries to ultimately exacerbate divisions that exist in the United States, and that one of the key issues that we're going to have to be facing as a country is the malign influence of such actors and how that's working into our system. It is obviously a whole of government activity and something that I hope the intelligence community can appropriately support, particularly in terms of the link and an understanding of the foreign influence that is being conducted. I know that in a recent law that's been passed that there was the direction to establish a Foreign Malign Influence Center within the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, and I look forward to working on that. And I think that could be part of the support that would be useful in this context.
Great. Thank you very much. The Vice Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to start building off of what the chairman said in his opening comments, that for, I would argue, a number of decades, we had a bipartisan consensus about China, that the more they came into the world order, the closer they would move to some level of international norms. I'll be the first to acknowledge I was part of that consensus, and I think I was wrong. This committee, over their own people extraordinarily poorly, whether they be Uyghurs or the people of Hong Kong. So I think it is important that we are clear-eyed about China. I do think it's important as well to recognize that our beef is not with the Chinese people, but with this Chinese Communist Party. So I want to just ask you straight out, Ms. Haines, is China under the rule of the Chinese Communist Party an adversary of the United States?
Thank you, Vice Chairman. I couldn't agree more with the priority that you're attaching to China and the need, I think, for the intelligence community to focus on this issue. I think in the context of China, China is adversarial and an adversary on some issues, and in other issues we try to cooperate with them, whether in the context of climate change or other things. And ultimately, the frame that the President-elect has...
who are trying to overthrow the results of a national election in our country. We know this is not a problem that is unique to America. We've seen similar right-wing groups spring up across many European nations, and some level of networking between what's happening in Europe and what's happening in this country. What role do you believe the IC should play in addressing violent threats originating from extremist groups such as the Proud Boys and other groups operating within the United States?
Thank you, Senator. And I just want to say how eerie it was even coming here today to see the National Guard out across Washington and in these halls. And my first reaction in watching the events was really concern and obviously empathy for all of you, for friends and colleagues who've worked in the Senate and in the House and across the Capitol, and how truly disturbing it was to see what was done to these sacred halls, frankly, and sort of the heart of our democracy, and how proud I was to be part of a country where I saw all of you not let it affect your work, not let you miss a beat, and come back in and do the work of the American people in that context. Truly remarkable. In any event, if I am confirmed as the Director of National Intelligence, obviously the intelligence community is not in the lead in managing these events. It's the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security. But the intelligence community, I hope, will have an important role in supporting their work and ultimately, in particular, looking at any connections there are between folks in the United States and externally in foreign, abroad or connections or influence that might have been appropriately identified as a context of the intelligence community.
Thank you. I want to get you, and I think you addressed this in your opening statement, but I think one of the most important jobs you're going to have is to restore both the morale within the public trust and confidence that the IC will provide honest, non-biased policy analysis. Can you speak to that for the record?
Yes, absolutely. I think this is fundamental to the work of the intelligence community, that we provide objective analysis, that we don't let politics play a role in our work is critical. And it has been my experience that that is what the institution is designed to do and intended to do. And it's fundamental to good policy decision-making, because if policy makers like yourself and others throughout the government don't have that unvarnished analysis, they don't have sufficient information, they don't have the best information that we can provide them in order for them to make the decisions that they need to make in order to protect the country and pursue our interests. So I am absolutely committed to this, and I know many of you have spoken on this issue and with eloquence and passion, and I am grateful for that, frankly, and it's something that I intend to focus on coming into the Office of Director of National Intelligence if I'm confirmed.
Senator Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Haines, I am one of the 4 principal authors of the 2004 law that created the Director of National Intelligence. Your endorsement by former DNI Director Dan Coates means a great deal to me because he was the model of how that office should be run in a completely nonpartisan, professional way. So let me follow up on the questions that you've just been asked by the Vice Chairman. As you know, there are some members of this committee and this Senate who viewed Director Ratcliffe as being too political in his approach. Others felt that former CIA Director Brennan was too partisan in his approach to the job. You are going to be responsible for determining what goes into the President's daily brief. Do you commit to publishing analytic products in the President's daily brief, even if those products do not match the views or the policy positions of this incoming administration?
I do, absolutely, Senator, and thank you for the question. I think, frankly, it's incredibly important to do that. I've seen that in the past. It's fundamental. It's what the President-elect, I believe, will expect from us, because he will want to know what information we have that actually conflicts with his policy positions.
Thank you. I want to switch to another issue, and that is the Iranian nuclear deal, commonly referred to as the JCPOA. Many in the Senate, myself included, did not support this agreement because it did not provide for anytime, anywhere inspections. It did not sufficiently constrain the development of ballistic missiles, and it would leave Iran in a stronger, wealthier position because of all the sunsets that were included in the agreement. President-elect Biden has indicated his intention to rejoin the JCPOA. I would like to know whether you have any reservations about your strong support for the agreement and how the threat of the Iranians developing nuclear weapons fits in with your priorities.
Thank you, Senator. So it's true. Obviously, the president-elect has indicated that if Iran were to come back into compliance, that he would direct that we do so as well. And I think, frankly, we're a long ways from that. And and I think there's going to be an opportunity to consult with Congress and with members like yourself on these issues as we look at that. But the president-elect is also under the circumstances for what is the appropriate act to be taken.
Thank you. Both the chairman and the vice chairman have mentioned China, and I want to chime in as well that China clearly is a key geopolitical adversary and poses a threat to our interests in terms of the theft of intellectual property and also potential spying through its telecommunications companies. Do you have any concerns about how the Obama administration approached China when you served in your capacity in that administration?
Thank you, Senator. I think our approach to China has to evolve and essentially meet the reality of the particularly assertive and aggressive China that we see today. China is a challenge to our security, to our prosperity, to our values across a range of issues. And I do support an aggressive stance, in a sense, to deal with the challenge that we're facing. So I think that's the place that we are now, and one that is more assertive than where we had been in the Obama-Biden administration. And if I'm confirmed, I think, frankly, the intelligence community can do a lot to help in that respect. I think keeping our focus, putting our resources and effort in making sure that we understand the intentions and capabilities of China, but also that we are actually recognizing and holding them to account, in effect, by identifying where they are taking actions that are inconsistent with our interests will be part of what I hope to focus on.
Thank you.
Senator Heinrich?
Ms. Haines, as we witnessed, and many of us, frankly, firsthand, on January 6th, a most serious threat to our democracy came from within. We've seen the current president, as he has done his utmost to stoke some of those grievances, those divisions that really fueled this threat, but his departure from office tomorrow is certainly not going to eliminate it. On December 8th, I wrote a letter along with a number of other senators to FBI Director Wray and also the acting director of DHS's Intelligence and Analysis Office, simply asking for a public written assessment of the threat that QAnon poses to our country. And we have not received a response to that letter. And I just wanted to ask you that if confirmed, if you would commit to simply working with the FBI and DHS's Intelligence and Analysis Office to provide us with a written assessment as requested.
Yes, Senator. Thank you very much. I've seen the letter, and I absolutely, if confirmed, would work with the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security to get you an answer to that question. And I know, in particular, you ask about foreign influence operations and how those are affecting QAnon and how they're exacerbating and the message that's being provided and the misinformation. So I will.
Would you expound a little bit on the question that Senator Warner asked you about the particular role of the IC with respect to domestic radicalized groups in the United States? For example, we have a very specific process internationally through the State Department to designate foreign terrorist organizations. We don't have any sort of process for domestic terrorist organizations. What are your thoughts on the proper role of the intelligence community in supporting law enforcement, the FBI in particular, Department of Homeland Security, with respect to threats to the homeland?
Thank you, Senator. So obviously the intelligence community is focused on foreign intelligence and on foreign, threats in effect. But there is, I think, a critical role that it can play and does play in supporting the work that's done by others, led by others in the government. So the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security obviously are critical and in the lead on much of this. But there are ways in which we can support, both by identifying where there are connections to international organizations, for example, and threats, to domestic threats, and also in just providing information about lessons learned for how organizations work internationally and to the FBI and to the Department of Homeland Security. And of course, through the National Counterterrorism Center, established in law, you gave it, in effect, a mandate that allows it to pull from domestic intelligence information holdings as well as foreign intelligence information holdings in order to be able to provide trends and reviews of issues that cross the seam, in effect, and make sure that those who are in the lead, such as the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security, have that information as they pursue these issues.
I suspect I'm probably going to run out of time before I have a chance to get to the bottom of all these things, but you and I have spoken quite a bit about the committee's detention and interrogation report and sort of the aftermath of all that. You wrote in your pre-hearing responses to questions about interrogation methods that even if a technique involving cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment were determined to be effective, I would not endorse its use. Those are your words. I wanted to go a step further and just ask you to be very specific on whether you agree that the specific techniques that were used in that program, waterboarding, a number of other so-called enhanced interrogation techniques, were not effective. Do you understand the distinction I'm asking?
I think so, sir. So I believe that waterboarding is, in fact, torture, constitutes torture under the law. And I do believe that all of those techniques, including techniques that involve cruel, inhuman, degrading treatment, are unlawful from both domestic and international perspective, and should not be engaged in, regardless, as I said, of whether or not they're effective. One
of the outcomes of our report was we found that these were not, in addition to being unlawful under current law, they weren't effective because people were so desperate to make things stop that they would tell us almost anything. Do you agree that those techniques were not effective in their use?
Yes, Senator, I think that your report does an excellent job, essentially, of identifying how there are actually better alternative methods to get true, accurate information, and that is a reality. My point was only to say that even if they were effective, from my perspective, I would not allow them to be engaged in.
Thank you.
And Senator Blunt needs to run for the inauguration, so I'm going to recognize you. I apologize to Senator Feinstein. I skipped her. She's going to go right after you.
Thank you, Chairman. Ms. Haines, you and I have had a chance to talk already about the challenge of this job. When we put the job together, we talked a lot about stovepiping and the importance of having somebody in the government whose job it was to be sure that information was shared as effectively and quickly as it could be. I think one of the challenges here, and I'm sure Director Coates understands this better than anybody in the room, is the person in your job having confidence in the material you're sharing, but also needing to share that material quickly when you do have confidence in it. Would you talk about that a little bit, where we don't allow this job to become a job where everybody else's job is redone before it can be shared with others?
Yes, Senator. I think this is obviously a critical issue with the national security communities, and I think there's sort of a number of aspects to it. And would relish engaging with you further on this issue too, to see if there are ways we can break this down. I think, in part, we have to ensure that we actually have the ability to share information across the intelligence community so that we can all take advantage of it and leverage it appropriately, and that we're not recreating the wheel in each of our different elements as you've identified. I also think that, there's opportunities with technology to actually promote mechanisms that allow us to use each other's work so that we don't have to do it ourselves in some spaces. And I think that's an important piece of it. But I think, as you also mentioned to me in our discussions, I think there is a concern, and I've heard this from other members as well, that the Director of National Intelligence and that the office does not replicate work that's being done in elements, that it itself is supposed to coordinate and to synchronize, but not to do it itself, in a sense. And I think that's a very fair concern. And obviously, I have to, if confirmed, get into the job and understand sort of how we're structured and whether or not we are, in fact, well allocated, in effect, to do what our mission is without replicating.
Thank you. I think the replication process, while some of that is almost always going to have to be done, could be the moment when things are slowed up just enough that the whole purpose for the job failed, because you're trying to figure out, okay, can we verify this information from the CIA or whoever? My sense is that's not your job. I think a job that we also talked about that I believe was not done in December with the cyber attack, the SolarWinds attack. I don't think anybody in this committee was ever notified by anybody in the community. I don't think we had a report from the CIA or a report from the NSA or anyone else who would have known. At what point do you think the Director of National Intelligence needs to be sure that information is being shared? Your principal client is clearly the president. You're nominated by the president, confirmed by the Senate. The president's your client. You work for the president, but you report to the Congress. I think that's clearly the structure that was set up in the early 70s, why this committee's in place. In that reporting process, how do you ensure that somebody who should be reporting to us has, in fact, reported to this committee and others in the Congress that they're required to report to?
Yeah, thank you, Senator. I mean, obviously, a major part of the job, as I've indicated, is, in fact, working with all of you and this committee and the House Intelligence Committee as well, and making sure that you're fully informed of significant intelligence activities and certainly of events such as SolarWinds as they come on our radar. What I would hope to do, in working with you, is to really establish kind of regular channels of communication and to ensure that we're providing you with the information that you need for oversight responsibilities, and to ensure that we have somebody who is on point, so to speak, and making sure that as part of my senior leadership team and reporting to you on the issues that are coming up as we're experiencing them and recognizing how significant they are.
Well, I do think every opportunity you have to share, every opportunity you're asked to come in really creates credibility for that moment when we all need it. Director Coates went to the job with a lot of credibility on this committee where he and I sat side by side for several years, but every time you can find a time to share, even if you almost have to look for that to be part, and I think should look for that to be part of your regular schedule, that's helpful. I have one other question. There's a Treasury, the Secretary of the Treasury is also at a hearing right now. We have in the Treasury Department a financial intelligence unit. The question I'd ask is your commitment and your idea of being sure that that unit is properly funded and how you think it fits into our overall intelligence effort as we keep track of our adversaries.
Thank you, Senator. I think, frankly, the Treasury Unit is critical because I believe that illicit financing is one of the critical sort of transnational organized crime issues that we need to face, and it obviously affects not just that, but terrorism, a variety of other transnational threats that are relevant, and we need to work with that part of the Department of Treasury to make sure that we're actually following that effectively. I think we haven't necessarily invested as many resources in that as we need to, and that's something that I would make a focus.
Thank you, Ms. Haines. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Feinstein, I apologize. Let's give her 6 minutes. It's like a gift card. I apologize for skipping you.
Thank you. I've asked previous nominees for being something I've been very concerned about and tried to address.
sorry, Senator, is your microphone? There we go.
Thank you.
There we go.
And tried to address for years. And we made a big push when I was chairman to ensure that all government functions of the IC were performed by government employees and not contractors. And it's my understanding that that effort continues today, that we have made substantial progress over the decades. Could you comment on your view of the use of contractors as the D&I?
Yes, Senator, thank you very much, and it's very nice to see you.
Could you speak directly into the mic?
Absolutely. Can you hear me better now? Thank you, Senator. So, yes, I know this has been an issue that you've shown leadership on, and there have been a number of communications between Congress, obviously, and the executive branch on this issue. I believe it is critical to ensure that contractors are not performing inherently governmental functions, and that is something that we need to manage, obviously, in the context of our work. But we obviously also rely on contractors for a lot of important work and expertise in the intelligence community, but it is a balance, and we have to ensure that they're fulfilling an appropriate role, as you identify.
Thank you, and I'd appreciate being kept advised. It's an issue I've long been interested in, and I've seen the growth figures change, and it's, I think, been beneficial for the agencies concerned, so I appreciate that. The world has seen firsthand the radicalization of significant numbers of Americans who now believe that the election was rigged, and some have sought to reverse its legitimate results by force. I, for one, am concerned about the threat in D.C. and across the country. How would you, if confirmed, approach the issue of right-wing domestic terrorism?
Thank you, Senator. Recognize that this is a major issue for the country. The intelligence community, of course, would not be in the lead on an issue such as solely domestic terrorism. This is something that I would expect the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security to be focused on, but that the intelligence community, I think, can provide them with support on these issues, critical support, I hope. Support both in terms of identifying connections between domestic terrorist actors and international terrorist actors. And in the context of white nationalism, for example, as you pointed out, we have seen, as I understand it, some connections. I need, if confirmed, to get in the job and actually get better informed based on classified information that's available on these questions, I think. But I do understand that there are some international connections and that this is an issue that we can provide some support to them on.
Thank you for that. I believe it was a mistake to pull the U.S. out unilaterally of the JCPOA with Iran. At the same time, Iran remains a threat in the region, and especially now that it has increased its civilian nuclear program. How will you approach the threat from Iran, especially in the wake of the killings of the IRGC commander Soleimani a year ago and the founder of Iran's nuclear program this year?
Thank you, Senator. I absolutely agree that Iran is a threat and a destabilizing actor in the region, and I think this is an issue that we need to focus in on. From the intelligence community perspective, if I'm confirmed, what I would hope to do is provide the best, most accurate intelligence that we have on the threat being posed and allow policymakers, therefore, to have that information as they make decisions about what actions to pursue with respect to Iran in the future.
Final question. What priorities do you assume for the agencies that you will provide oversight on? And how strong a director do you see yourself being?
Thank you, Senator. I see myself as a strong director, I hope, in the future. Look, I think in order to set the priorities, which I know is part of the vision for what the Director of National Intelligence does, I both have to consult with my policy leaders, in a sense, and work through a framework that's aligned with what the policy priorities are, but also work with my partners, essentially, across the intelligence community and the different elements of the intelligence community to ensure that we have things correctly prioritized. But I agree that prioritization is necessary. And although I think we can do more than one thing at a time, in a sense, I think we do have to make some choices about how we allocate our resources. And that's going to be part of the hard job that I see being performed by the Director of National Intelligence.
Quickly, could you just give me your top 3 priorities again?
Sure. To be honest, my priorities are institutional at this moment for the Office of Director of National Intelligence. And the way I would describe the top 3 are basically strengthening the institution, the workforce, and ensuring that we have promoted trust and credibility throughout. That is a first priority, and I believe that involves many of the things that we've already talked about in the context of analytic objectivity, in actually promoting workforce retention and recruitment and talent, and in promoting transparency in many respects, both with the committee and with the American people on these issues. A second priority is really in aligning our work, our efforts, our resources in the intelligence community to the major threats that we are facing today and also the ones that we expect to be facing tomorrow. And that involves, as indicated, really focusing in on some of the traditional threats that we've identified, such as China, but also identifying the transnational threats, being there to work on things like public health and transnational organized crime and corruption and disinformation and issues along those lines. And then I'd say the third priority, in effect, is in building the partnerships that are so critical to the intelligence community. And that's partnerships with the committee, but it's also partnerships with academia, with the private sector, with state and local actors, and a variety of partnerships around the world are obviously our foreign liaison partnerships. And all of those, I think, are crucial to making us effective.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just one request. I might ask you to report periodically to us on the progress on the 3 priorities that you mentioned. I think they were significant and important, and I'd be most interested in your progress in that area.
I'd welcome
Thank
that,
you.
Senator. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Senator Cornyn?
Thank you, Ms. Haines. Congratulations on your nomination.
Thank you.
I know you support the reentry of the United States into the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. Do you believe Iran should ever be allowed to get nuclear weapons?
No, Senator, I don't believe that Iran should ever be allowed to get a nuclear weapon. Thank you.
And I think Senator Feinstein was asking about right-wing extremist groups. There's a story reported today by Stratfor that describes Russia's experience in tradecraft in terms of encouraging right and left-wing extremist groups to create problems for democracies like the United States. Do you acknowledge that as a aspect of Russian, in particular, tradecraft?
Yes, Senator, I've certainly seen Russia's use of active measures and a variety of influence campaigns in order to exacerbate some of the divisions in this country and to promote extremism in a sense.
Well, I for one, am going to ask the FBI director to brief us on any foreign intelligence or other actors that may have been involved in the January 6th events that we were all a witness to, and look forward to hearing what he has to say. And of course, you will be, as DNI, you will be working very closely with the FBI, and maybe that's a subject we can revisit at a later time. You and I discussed the Foreign Agent Registration Act and the Lobbyist Disclosure Act, the LDA and FARA, and I expressed to you my concern that it's possible under the current state of the law for foreign governments to hire Americans to help influence Congress and other domestic policymakers. Is that a concern that you share?
Thank you, Senator. We did discuss this, and I think I understand why you'd be concerned in certain circumstances. I'm of the view that there are certain circumstances in which it may be appropriate and even useful to the United States to have former government officials work with other foreign governments and companies, but I recognize the concern that you have.
Well, shouldn't that be disclosed?
Absolutely, Senator. I believe in disclosing information that is of relevance, obviously, to the ethics.
Well, right now, under the current state of the law, it's possible to use a law firm or some other cutout to obscure the relationship between a foreign government and people lobbying Congress to make policy unbeknownst to Congress. Isn't that true?
Senator, I take your word for it. I don't know the law well enough in this area.
Well, I know you're a smart lawyer. That's a topic I hope that you will work with us on, because when we passed the Justice for State Sponsors of Terrorism Act, the JASTA Act, I became aware of the fact that the Saudi Arabians were hiring lobbyists on K Street to try to get Congress to not pass that change in sovereign immunity law to allow the 9/11 families to get justice in American courts for any action by a foreign government to finance that terrorist attack. And of course, that ended up passing unanimously in the Senate. We passed it over President Obama's veto. But as you and I talked about, was very disturbed by that, and it demonstrated a real opportunity, unbeknownst to members of Congress, to have advanced the interests of foreign governments, not the U.S. government, not the American people, but foreign governments in the halls of Congress. And that's something that I'm absolutely committed to trying to close those loopholes, and I hope you'll work with us on that. Finally, for now, you and I discussed your role at West Executive Advisors, West X, however you pronounce that. How do you pronounce it?
West Exec.
Oh, West Exec
Well done.
Advisors. And I noticed in your disclosures that at one point you mentioned that you were a contractor, and in another place you mentioned you were a principal. To me, those are very different. Do you recall where you made that disclosure?
Yeah, so I was, my title was principal, but I was a consultant, which is under contract essentially for the entire time that I was with West Exec.
Well, if you're a principal, then presumably you would have access to the client lists of West Exec, and you would receive income and report that income on your tax returns as wages. But if you were a contractor, presumably you would report that on your tax returns differently on a 1099, where the FICA and withholding would not be taken out of your check. That to me is an important difference between the role as a principal versus a contractor. Can you explain that?
Sure. So, Senator, I worked for West Exec less than a day a month on average during the entire time I was with them, and I was as a consultant. I realize that the title of principal may sound as if it's more involved than it is, but that was my entire relationship with them. And
well, I think the term principal has some legal significance, don't you?
No, sir. I think it was just a title.
You don't. Just a title. And you, if necessary to resolve any questions you have offered in your written responses to make your last 3 years of tax returns available, correct?
Yes, sir.
I appreciate that.
No, of course.
Thank you for now.
Thank you, Senator.
Senator Wyden.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Haines, welcome. And as interested as I am in your former bookstore ownership, I'm going to save those questions for another day.
Excellent, Senator.
Let me start with the fact that you'll have an opportunity, if confirmed, to immediately turn a page on the excessive secrecy and lawlessness of the outgoing administration. The Congress, as you know, passed a law requiring the DNI to submit to the Congress an unclassified report on who was responsible for the brutal murder of Jamal Khashoggi. If you are confirmed, will you submit to the Congress the unclassified report required by the law?
Yes, Senator. Absolutely. We'll follow the law.
Thank you. Back in 2014, the CIA accessed the shared drives of this committee that we were using to write the torture report and even read committee emails. Do you acknowledge that this was wrong?
I do, sir. I believe that it was wrong that the intelligence community had access to SISI staff emails, and I know Director Brennan apologized for it, and I agreed with that apology.
All right. In 2013, after reviewing the committee's torture report, the CIA acknowledged significant shortcomings with regard to accountability, including management failures. CIA recommended that accountability reviews should be broadened to include systemic failures and accountability for individuals who are responsible for the failures. Do you agree with this recommendation? And if you're confirmed, would you seek to apply it to the intelligence community?
Yes, Senator, I agree with the 2013 recommendation that the Central Intelligence Agency indicated, and to broaden the approach of accountability review boards as you identified.
Good. Now, I want to ask a question with respect to transparency. I thought our conversation was helpful, and get into the issue of surveillance. Senator Heinrich and I have been very involved in this, and I'm particularly troubled by the intelligence community's purchases of Americans' private data. It's almost like, getting around the whole question of people's privacy rights. And so transparency is crucial. And my question here is, if you are confirmed, would you agree to inform Americans about any circumstances in which the intelligence community purchases their data and the legal basis for doing it?
Thank you, Senator. I know I'm not up to date at this point, but would be if confirmed, obviously, on the degree to which we're purchasing commercially available information. But I would seek to try to publicize essentially a framework that helps people understand the circumstances under which we do that and the legal basis that we do that under. I think that's part of what's critical to promoting transparency generally, is so that people have an understanding of the guidelines under which the intelligence community operates.
I want to work with you on that. The abuses here take your breath away, and it really is a dodge on all the legal protections Americans have. So we're going to follow that up with you quickly if confirmed. Let's go now to the whistleblower issue, where you and I talked, I thought, constructively about what the challenge is. Now, when the intelligence community inspector general determines that a whistleblower complaint is an urgent concern, the law is clear. The DNI shall send that complaint to the Congress. The Trump administration violated this all the time, specifically by withholding the Ukraine whistleblower complaint. Do you agree, one, that the law is clear, and if confirmed, you would send those cases, those whistleblower cases, to the Congress?
Thank you, Senator. I agree that the DNI must transmit credible whistleblower complaints on matters of urgent concern to the Congress, and I commit that I would do so.
Good. Finally, we've had a hearing on this. The classification system is just broken. It is a broken mess, and it's gotten to the point where members of the community, I see, apparently spend so much time carrying it out. Some days they practically have to pack a lunch to just go from agency to agency getting kind of sign-offs. Senator Moran and I have introduced bipartisan legislation to authorize the DNI to finally fix this dysfunctional, mess. Do you agree that a serious problem exists and the DNI should fix it?
Yes, Senator. Overclassification and the classification system generally has been a perennial issue I found in government in my experience, and one that does require some work. And I commit to you, if confirmed, that I would have an opportunity to try to come up with a plan and to engage with you further on these issues and to see whether or not technology, for example, might not help us in some aspects of this problem. But I recognize it's a broader issue than just technology.
Thank you, Ms. Haines. Chairman Rubio, I've had almost as much time as Senator Cornyn, our friend, and I'm going to stop. I do want to make clear to the chair and the ranking members, I'm going to need a bit of time to discuss this nomination on the floor. Ms. Haines knows that, to discuss some of the other issues that are pending, but that will be appropriate for now. Thank you.
Senator Sass.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Haines, thank you for your willingness to serve again. Congratulations on your nomination, and I appreciate the time that you've taken with me and with other members en route to this open hearing. And you know there are a number of things that I want to talk about in our closed hearing, so I will follow the precedent of the last two members and stick to time here, but just admitting that this is more of a preview for where we're headed in the closed session. I want to talk about China policy, and I want to flag the important, and I think, many times we'll throw around the word bipartisan here, but I think what you heard from Chairman Rubio and from Vice Chairman Warner was really singing off the exact same song sheet, that the American people shouldn't view China policy and the need to upgrade the China policy of the IC as a partisan cudgel. There were bipartisan failures for a decade and a half. And there's been nearly bipartisan agreement for pushing half a decade on the fact that dealing with the Chinese Communist Party is the #1 issue the national security community faces. The national security strategy of 2017 that this administration wrote was very good, and it builds on things that the Obama administration had been saying going all the way back to 2012 about the need to pivot to Asia. And I think Mark Warner also said, and I'm sure Chairman Rubio would agree, we need the American people to understand that our opponent is not the Chinese people, our opponent is not Chinese Americans, but our opponent is the Chinese Communist Party. And when you do the around the world tour of national security threats that we face, and that the IC and the DoD and the larger national security bureaucracies and infrastructure need to be focused on, we always talk about China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, and a grab bag of jihadis. There are 5 big threats around the world. And yet, if we look at the resources of the intelligence community, it still doesn't show a primary focus on China that I think is the bipartisan consensus in this committee. So I would love to have you, and again, this is not blaming anybody in a previous administration, 2 ago or the one that ends tomorrow, but the reality is the IC is still way too slow to pivot toward the primary focus that we need to have in the community on China. Can you help us understand why the slowness persists and what you're going to do about it?
Thank you, Senator. And I know we talked about this, and you've obviously demonstrated quite a bit of leadership on this. And I heard from a number of members a concern over this issue. And if confirmed, I will absolutely make it a priority from my perspective to ensure that we are allocating the right resources and addressing this issue, because I think it's critical to us actually having then the information on which we can base a policy that will actually effectively address the questions that you've raised. In terms of why, it would obviously, I prefer to answer that after I've had a chance to get in and to hear from folks. But, we talked together a little bit about some of the things that I had seen previously that were challenges in trying to actually affect the kind of rebalance of Asia policy that the Obama-Biden administration engaged in. And I think it is true that there are just there is a natural focus on issues that the intelligence community has been focusing on for some time by career folks who have spent a lot of time working on those issues. And if you are in the senior leadership of the intelligence community, most of you have spent time on counterterrorism, on some of the war zones that we've been in, and on Middle East issues and a variety of things in those spaces. But there isn't the same level of experience across the intelligence community with respect to Asia. And so that, that's another aspect of how sometimes it's challenging to get folks to focus on new issues and to actually make sure that they're being prioritized in the way that we all believe that they should be. And I agree that I've seen it on a bipartisan basis, and I think that gives us an opportunity to really address this, hopefully, in the most effective way possible. Sorry, sir.
No, that's good.
No.
I didn't mean to cut you off, but
Please.
I do want to nitpick a little bit about our articles. It isn't a policy priority. It needs to be the policy priority. And it seems to me that we need to change the IC's perspective from a burden of proof for the status quo, or the assumption that the status quo is normal and the burden of proof is on those who want to change. The policy should be, inertia of motion should be toward ramping up our hiring pipeline of Mandarin speakers. And it should be the burden of proof put on those who would say, no, how we're doing it works, because how we're doing it doesn't work. We've said year over year, I've been here for, I guess, just now ticking 6 years, and every year we hear our leaders tell us we're going to pivot toward Asia, but it isn't actually playing out in our hiring policy. It isn't playing out in the sort of senior briefings we're getting. There isn't a mindshare shift toward Asia. So I guess I would ask you, as I'm at time precisely, could you commit to us that by June 30th you'd report back to the CICI with a strategic plan toward actually increasing the hiring pipeline, particularly of Mandarin speakers, and that we would get to a place where in the IC we would see a majority of our or we would see a larger number of officers and analysts focused on China than on CT. Counterterrorism simply is not as great a threat as our long-term China issues are. And so I think a number of us in this committee would love to know that by 6 months into the job, or however long it takes post-confirmation, that you could give us a strategic plan of how China actually becomes, in reality, not merely in rhetoric, the #1 priority of our IC.
Thank you, Senator. I absolutely am happy to commit to you that within 6 months of being confirmed that I come back to this committee on this issue. And I think if you'll allow me, I would work with you on what are the right metrics by which to think that through and to demonstrate that we've correctly prioritized it. But I take your point, both on the articles and on the fact that we should be looking at the kind of metrics that you described. So I'll endeavor to do so.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Senator King, virtual.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, thank you very much.
Are you in the space station? Oh, there he is. Look at that. There you go. The International Space Station. Uh-oh. I told him to get rid of that Huawei phone, but... Angus, are you there?
But
I think we should come back to him.
I think you said you saved a bunch of money by switching to Geico, but I couldn't.
I'm not driving. Okay.
There it is.
Ms. Haines, my first quick question is, when you took off on that purported transatlantic flight, where in Maine did you depart from? I just have to know.
Yes, Senator. Bangor, Maine. Bangor, sorry.
Bangor. All right.
Collins corrected me.
When I heard you left for Maine, I had to have the answer. More seriously, you've talked extensively today about your concern about the politicization of intelligence, and I wholeheartedly agree with you. What do you believe should be done structurally to ensure the integrity of the analytic process? In other words, just saying it's going to be not compromised needs to be buttressed by structural and institutional supports, it seems to me, like additional support for the ombudsman program in the CIA and throughout the community. Can you talk to me about how to put into practice your concern about the politicization of intelligence?
Yes, Senator, thank you. Fully appreciate also your leadership on these issues. I don't have specific structural recommendations at this stage. I do think it's reasonable to consider whether or not the Ombudsman has sufficient support. I think that one of the first things I'd like to do is send the clear message to the intelligence community that we are expected to produce apolitical, unvarnished intelligence to the president-elect, to his senior advisors, and that the president himself expects that and will expect the intelligence community to provide information regardless of whether or not he wants to hear it. And that is, that initial message is only a piece of it, as you've identified. I think we also need to ensure that we have an ombudsman in place that is capable of doing the kinds of reviews that are necessary, would want to make sure that they are fully resourced. I also think it may be useful for us to do a climate survey coming in order to really understand what is the experience of analysts that is being had right now? What are the challenges and the pressures that they're experiencing? I obviously read the recent Ombudsman's report, and I have a number of questions that were raised by that report and want to fully understand the various types of politicization that may be occurring within the analytic community in order to try to support them. But I would commit, sir, to come back to you on these issues once I've had an opportunity, if confirmed, to dig in a sense, and also to get your advice on these questions.
Has the president-elect ordered you to tell him the truth?
The president-elect has just about done that. I'm not sure he hasn't put it in writing that way, but he has made it absolutely clear that he expects that the intelligence community will provide him with apolitical, truth to power analysis, and truly has been adamant about this, because I think he really understands and recognizes the importance of that to the health of the decision-making process within government.
Well, I think the danger, the good news is you have a long and positive relationship with the president-elect. You have his confidence, obviously. The bad news is that long relationship could create a kind of friendship that would inadvertently or unconsciously skew your advice. Not that you wouldn't tell him something he needs to hear, but you might not want to tell him something he doesn't want to hear. So I hope that you will continue to maintain a positive, confident relationship, but at the same time, be prepared because there are going to be moments when in your analysis, your agency's analysis is going to differ from the policy proclivities of the administration. Another question is, how do you overcome, or how do you go about overcoming the parochialism of the agencies which you are called upon to lead? I'm not sure that the community has ever fully embraced or accepted the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. Do you view that as an ongoing project and a priority?
I do, sir. So on both questions, I think they're ones I've thought a lot about. So on the first one, on the relationship piece, I absolutely take your point, and I do think it's one of those things where I am going to have to absorb and ensure that I'm projecting and living the fact that the relationship that the president should have with his director of national intelligence is quite different than the relationship he should have with, for example, his national security advisor. And I intend to try to live, essentially what I believe to be the right role institutionally for the director of national intelligence, to be at in a sense, arm's length in that way, so that it is absolutely clear that my intention there is to provide analysis regardless of whether it's what he wants to hear or not. The second point that you make, I also agree with. I think it's one of the great challenges is helping the intelligence community to see the value of the Office of Director of National Intelligence. And I believe that the way to promote a less what's the right word, sort of tribal approach to each of these institutions is to demonstrate how through synchronization, coordination, and through the vision, in effect, that the Office of the Director of National Intelligence can promote, that every element is going to benefit. In a sense, all of us are going to be stronger together than we are apart, and if we can work together, we can actually help each other to be the best that we can be from each of these elements points. I realize that's a lot easier to say than to do, but I intend to try, and I believe it for what it's worth.
Don't forget, the basic purpose was that we realized we had really good stovepipes, but they were still stovepipes. So that's your mission. One final comment, not a question. I know I'm almost out of time, and that is, I hope you'll bring some attention to the question of cultural intelligence, of understanding our adversaries in a long-term cultural, economic, and strategic way, as opposed to just the tactical, what are they likely to do next week? I often feel that we make mistakes in foreign policy by not understanding the long history of our adversaries and expecting them to think and act just as we would.
Thank you, Senator. I will endeavor to do so. That makes an awful lot of sense to me and something I've seen the value of in the past.
All right, thank you, Senator King. So we have Senator Bennett, Senator Reed, and then I think our intention is, after we finish, is to do like a 30, 40-minute 30-minute transition over to the closed hearing? 30, 29-minute transition over to the other space. You can't hear me? No, we can't even get food in here. You kidding me? We're waiting for some sort of food drop. I guess they're going to fly over and. All right, Senator Bennett.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much for lunch. We all appreciate it. Senator Coates, I want to thank you for being here today. And it's a great sign, I think, of things to come and maybe what this committee can do. Ms. Haines, thank you very much for your willingness to serve. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Democracy is a tough business, even when it's working well. I would argue that ours is not working very well, and it is at the moment. And that's why I so much appreciate Senator Coates being here, because we have to figure this out. And it's leaving us exposed, on the one hand, to anti-democratic forces in our own country that are using social media in ways that they were not when you were last serving in government, but are today in a way that's really, I think, threatening to corrode our democracy in fundamental ways. This is technology. This is not. It's something else. We need, and we need to figure it out with a through line that goes from Republican administrations to Democratic administrations to Republican administrations. The same is true, in my view, for China. I know others have talked about that here today, but when you and I had a chance to talk earlier in the last couple of weeks, you know, I mentioned one of my real concerns about China, which is that they benefit from having a system that can look out 20 years and 25 years and 50 years. And we're lucky if we can get through a single 24-hour cycle on the cable television and still be thinking about the same thing we were thinking about yesterday. And so my first question to you is to ask you whether you've given any thought to how we think about, as the intelligence community in this country, and you as being the leader here, a way of thinking out in 20-year terms and 30-year terms. Not that we're not going to change our approach, but that we can create a discipline, a way of thinking about these challenges, in China in particular as a challenge, so that we're not just collateral damage in their wake. I wonder if you've given that some thought.
Yeah, Senator, thank you very much. I know, first of all, on your first point about social media, that the committee's done quite a bit of work in this area and has been thinking about it. And I look forward, if confirmed, to digging in on these questions. And
unfortunately, we haven't yet figured out any of the answers.
Fair enough. I think you're not alone in this. It is, it's an area where I agree we need to focus, and I understand that, you know, the Foreign Malign Influence Center that you have established in law, and that we're responsible, I think, for promoting, if I'm confirmed, and establishing, is maybe a place where we can start to think through how the intelligence community can support some of those efforts, which I think will have to be whole of government efforts, obviously, because it's not just in the intelligence community that we'll need to work on this. But so completely agree with that, and would look forward to working with you further on these issues. The second one about China, I also very much agree with, and I see this in a. You know, China is oddly, I think, capable and focused on a very long-term horizon, where the United States frequently is not, and that this is a kind of an asymmetry that challenges us. And I've seen the challenge even within government that I know many of you experience, which is that the urgent tends to crowd out the important, and that it's very hard to manage the inbox and to actually do the kind of strategic thinking and analysis that's critical to actually addressing the challenges that we're facing in the future. And that there's sort of no place else other than the intelligence community, in a way, that is well positioned to even begin to do this for the president and his advisors. And if confirmed, I would very much hope to do this. And I know the National Intelligence Council is obviously a place where that has generally been an area of focus, in a sense. But I think that there is now a recognition, at least I recognize the president-elect talks about the need to think about these challenges strategically, to have these kind of whole of government and long-term plans, and to promote them in a way that allows them to be sustainable through different political, administrations, and the intelligence community can be the answers at this point, but I am absolutely agree with you on the challenge, and I hope to work on it, and I welcome your advice on these questions.
I appreciate that, and I think that, it's likely to require some sort of structural change in the way we approach it. Probably has implications for our oversight as well. I think we ought to work together to make sure we're upholding our end of the bargain too. The last point I just wanted to address, I know it may sound parochial because Colorado is the epicenter for space in our national defense, but as you know, the threat has become more and more real in the time that you've been out of government, and I just want to hear you talk a little bit about how you view threats in space, how you assess it, how much of a priority will this be for the Biden administration. To their credit, I almost never said anything good about the Trump administration, but they made space a priority, and it's my hope that that's only going to be more so in this new administration.
Yeah, thank you, Senator. I think space is an absolutely critical issue that we need to focus on. It's obviously an entire domain, but it also is an area where I think we have the potential to be at asymmetric risk in a sense. And, we have obviously very high value assets that can be held at risk at relatively low cost at times from adversaries in these areas. And it's an area where I think, at least during my time in the Obama-Biden administration, we sort of increasingly recognize the importance and also the changes that were occurring in space, the increasing private sector development and potential in those areas, and how that interacted with our national security interests, and trying to develop the kind of norms that are necessary in order to promote what is in our interest more generally began to be a focus, and I think is even more so now. And if confirmed, I would, in the intelligence community, I would expect to facilitate that work, to promote this issue, to really try to understand it as best we can. And I think with the addition of the Space Force element, obviously, of the intelligence community, I'll have an opportunity to do so even more so than before.
Thank you. Thanks. I apologize to my colleagues for going over. Sorry, Jack.
Thank you.
Senator Reed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me congratulate you, Ms. Haines, for your nomination. I have every confidence in you, and let me also recognize Senator Coates for his extraordinary work as the DNI, and thank you, Dan. Recently, we witnessed the greatest cyber intrusion in the history, I think, perhaps of the world, by the Russians. I know you're still trying to evaluate the intelligence community, the effects, but it's sort of found its way off the front pages. But my feeling is this could be one of the most significant events that have transpired in the last several months, and we have to get our arms around it, and that each day we find out more and more discouraging and demoralizing details of what they've done and what they may do in the future. Could you put this in context for us? Am I being too alarmist?
No, Senator, I agree with you. This is a major concern, and my sense, as consistent with what you've just said, is that obviously, I have a lot more to learn about what we know about this at this stage. I haven't had a full classified briefing on this at all, but I think the Department of Homeland Security already, indicated publicly that this is a grave risk to our government systems, to our critical infrastructure, to the private sector, across a range of things, and it does seem to be quite extraordinary in its nature and its scope. And I think this is an area where we obviously have to focus in order to protect the country.
Another issue is trying to discern their motivation and their intent to exploit this. Again, I presume, since you haven't been fully briefed yet, that you're not aware of it, but that's one issue you'll pursue dramatically. I think another aspect of this, and we're like a broken record here when you talk about stovepiping, is the Russians learned a great deal from 2016 when they were buying web services with rubles, when they were having, we could fairly easily identify their service in St. Petersburg, et cetera. As I understand, this operation was launched from American servers, that there was that's why we didn't find out for many, many months. And in fact, it wasn't our intelligence services, it was a private security firm. As a result, it exposes once again the stovepiping we have. Cybercom cannot, because of legal and constitutional issues, be as open with their information to Homeland Security. We have FBI, and we have the Congress. If we're trying to deal with a remedy to this situation, it would be this committee, probably the Defense Committee because of Cybercom, also the Judiciary Committee, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I think the challenge you're going to face is we need some type of more coherent, cohesive, integrated approach to deal with a threat that is much more sophisticated than 4 or 5 years ago.
Yes, and absolutely share your concern that we make sure that we're actually able to detect these, because that's obviously critical to us protecting against them. And I think, to your point, it was pretty alarming that we found out about it through a private company as opposed to our being able to detect it ourselves to begin with.
So I think that's one of the major tasks you should face. And again, the irony is this seems to have receded from public interest, but it could be the most critical issue you face. Just one final question, that is, there's always been a debate about the responsibilities for kinetic operations between military special forces and generally the Central Intelligence Agency operatives. How would you define it? There are some people that urge that any kinetic operation be reserved for special forces, but it's a very, I think, complicated issue. Any thoughts? And I just have a minute left.
Thank you, Senator. I think it's as you say, it's a complicated issue, and I'm not sure, it's hard to talk about probably in open session, and maybe something that we can reserve for a closed session if that's acceptable from your perspective.
If you'd like to defer, thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chairman.
All right, just for follow-up, we have Senator Warner, Senator Cornyn, and then we're going to break for about 30 minutes and reconvene in the closed session.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me, 2 quick comments and one quick question. I want to echo what Senator Reid has said about the SolarWinds hack. I think it's been fairly stunning to me how one part of our government doesn't seem to know what the other part is doing. And we, as you pointed out, we had to rely upon the good graces of a private sector company to even reveal this hack. I think also one of the things that has been clear from the intelligence community, every part of the intelligence community that I've talked to on SolarWinds, that we saw, unfortunately, again, this White House underplay the attribution on Russia. And that is extraordinarily concerning to me and something I hope that you will correct. Second, I mentioned this to Senator Cornyn on the way out. I'm not familiar with the structure of the firm that you worked with, but I would say I think in the consulting business, the term principal is used fairly willy-nilly, not necessarily reflecting an equity stake. And I think it's been used by McKinsey. I think it's been used by DLA Piper, Ernst & Young, and no reflection upon, I think, probably the great work you did, but it is a way to give someone an elevated status without necessarily the power that goes along with that terminology. But John and I mentioned the fact that sometimes truth in advertising out of the consulting world is a little gray. The question I want to raise, and I want to give, again, credit to our good friend Dan Coates. We've never had an introducer stay as long for testimony. Now, the fact that he can't get off the Hill without your escort may be a part of that answer. But one of the things that Senator Coates worked with this committee on, and something the current administration should get some credit on, was security clearance reform. And he and Sue Gordon did a great, great job at the beginning of Senator Coates' tenure. We had backlogs in security clearance that was above 250,000. People were taking 6 months to a year. Actually, I'm sorry, we had it above 750,000, and we were taking 6 months to a year to even longer getting clearance, and we were losing, really good quality people. Under Dan's leadership, we brought that down to about 200,000 today. There's still some challenges around adjudication, and you may not be fully familiar with the current administration worked on this effort under the framework of Trusted Workforce 2.0 initiative. There was great consensus from the IC. Unfortunately, President Trump was never willing to sign the executive order to fully implement that. I think the work has all been done, and there was complete consensus from the IC. It's I'm not sure if you've had a chance to look at this, but security clearance reform for bringing in good folks into the IC in governmental roles, as Senator Feinstein mentioned, in terms of agencies like the CIA, but also in the contractor community is really important. I'd like you to briefly speak to that.
Thank you very much, Senator. And I know this is, Vice Chairman, something that you've, exercised some leadership on. And you talked to me when we discussed privately about this question and noted the terrific work that Director Coates had done on this question. And I understand that it has stalled a bit in the last few years. And this is something that I will absolutely prioritize in coming in. I recognize the importance of it, frankly, to getting talent into the intelligence community, the talent that we need at the time that we need it and the critical moments that we're facing. This is not a challenge that we should be dealing with. So absolutely would be committed to addressing this.
Senator Cornyn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate Senator Reid's questions about cyber issues. Seems like we still haven't quite figured out how to deal with that domain and what the appropriate doctrine is. I guess George Kennan was given credit for coming up with the concept of containment of the Soviet Union, and particularly dealing with the nuclear threat that Russia posed and still poses to the United States and the rest of the world. And the concept of deterrence plays a very important role in that. What do you think the appropriate role of deterrence is in terms of constraining cyber actors like Russia and others who may be not as sophisticated as they are? It seems to me that we're sitting ducks from cyber attacks, whether it's the Office of Personnel Management, the acquisition by the Chinese government of all the personnel records of people, including the ones who have security clearances. And now the latest one is deterrence the objective? How would you define it?
So thank you, Senator. I think obviously this is a critical issue, and as you say, we clearly have not solved it yet. And I think one of the great challenges that we face in the United States in particular is the asymmetry of the threat in cyber. I mean, I think it is relatively easy for adversaries to hold at risk what are high-value assets to the United States, given how much we rely on cyber and digital work for our economy, for our security, for so many different issues, at relatively low risk to them in an unconventional way. And as you point out, deterrence has been discussed, as a way to, in a sense, affect risk management in this space. And I think Professor Nye has written some very interesting articles on this point that I thought were very perceptive, and indicates sort of a theory of deterrence and a way to approach this issue that I saw in government, and that I think in some respects the Trump administration has been trying to pursue, which is that you approach it on through a whole series of different tools, in a sense. So one is the president-elect has indicated that there should be an imposition of costs, for example, with respect to solar winds. And when you have an imposition of costs, you can deter, obviously, actors from engaging further in that activity if the cost is sufficient, that it actually has an impact on them and their decision-making in that context. I think that working with allies and partners in order to impose costs can actually raise the cost, essentially, and therefore help to promote deterrence and, again, push back. There's also, obviously, in the theory of deterrence, the idea that if you build up resilience, that you can also affect deterrence. So if we are better at protecting ourselves and defending ourselves from such attacks and breaches in the future, that it makes it less worthwhile, in a sense, for the adversary to engage in these issues. And I also think that in the context of, work that would be well outside of the intelligence community, but in the policy community, and hopefully work that we could support, if we are capable of building up norms and frameworks for managing this, and that if we do so with the private sector, which is absolutely critical, obviously, to these issues, that we have an opportunity to also promote deterrence more effectively. And, I think the private sector relationships, something that I know for years we have talked about the importance of them in this space. It hasn't obviously gotten any easier, and these partnerships are critical to us working together on these questions. I think it's something like 85% of our critical infrastructure is owned by the private sector in this area, and we need to work with them in order to ensure that we're all pushing in the same direction to promote the deterrence that we'd like to promote. But I wish I had all the answers, but I look forward to working on this if confirmed and trying to provide to you some answers.
Well, just like we negotiate treaties to hopefully curtail the availability of nuclear weapons, you believe that there is an opportunity to negotiate treaties with other countries to establish international norms in cyber?
So, Senator, I don't know that a treaty would be the most useful way to do it at this stage, certainly. I think that it is possible to promote norms through a variety of means. So, for example, setting up activity that is sanctionable and identifying what activity is unacceptable, for example, and doing so with your partners and allies, and therefore being sort of aligned in what the response would be to such unacceptable activity, and giving notice, in effect, to adversaries as to what will happen should they engage in that activity, is a way to promote a norm without a treaty, but nevertheless to promote deterrence. So I think that's a way that I would support, for example, or have supported in the past, building out that work. But if confirmed, I think from the Director of National Intelligence perspective and the IC perspective, I think something we can do is promote the ability to detect when adversaries are engaging in such activities, so as to then provide information about attribution, for example, and then hold adversaries to account through that.
One last question about West Exec Advisors.
Yes.
There's before July, the West Exec website touted its work helping major American universities court donations in China without jeopardizing Pentagon-funded research grants. That reference was eliminated after sometime between July 26th and August the 2nd. The website continues to say the company helps clients navigate China-related risks in an era of strategic competition. Did you, at the time you were affiliated with West Exec, were you ever involved in a conversation about how the company would hold itself out, or what the activities they might conduct relative to China?
No, sir. I'm not even aware of the reference on the website that you're describing, and I did no consulting activity vis-a-vis China at all, and I don't. I suspect that the risk issue is more about companies that might have been interested in doing business in a global market, but I just don't have any knowledge.
Thank you.
About that work. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So we're gonna break here for about 30 minutes, and I would say to reconvene for our closed hearing around 12:35. I just want to state this for the record. For planning purposes, if any members of the committee wish to submit questions for the record after today's hearing, they need to do so by the close of business on Thursday.